I think a lot of people like the fact that they don't understand it, which seems counterintuitive. Why would you be interested in something that you don't understand? Because that's the attraction, because it's there in front of you like begging to be understood. And so I go out of my way when I do my designs to make sure that when knobs are turned, changes happen. I can play a little bit of piano, I can sight read some music, but I'm not a musician. I'm strictly an engineer. I have a master's in electrical engineering. I was interested in music because my father's business in Houston when I was growing up was across the street from Visceral and pipe organs, which at the time was like the third largest pipe organ manufacturer in the United States. And so I would go across the street and talk to these pipe organ people. And it turns out that they needed some electrical work done, simple stuff. So I kind of helped the guy out and kind of got interested that way. But I actually grew up being a chemist. So my interest in high school and when I started college was to be a chemist. So the electrical engineering started because the chemistry department made it clear that you could not get a job unless you had a PhD in chemistry. And my parents told me flat out, we're not paying for that much school. You have two younger sisters, find something else to do. So I went into electrical engineering because I had an interest in stereos, but I didn't know that much about it. And it was a bit of a struggle. As we say, I crammed a 4-year program into 5 years. I got interested in synthesizers just because I heard one particular record in a record store. And I said to myself, if I'm going to get through this electrical engineering program, I have to have something that I can focus on besides just the equations and the abstractness of it, because I was struggling. There's not much math in chemistry, but there's a lot of math in electrical engineering. And so I came from a very small high school. We had 60 people in my graduating class, and so my math background wasn't strong enough in the senior level classes to get through the engineering, so I had to have a motivation. So I heard Larry Fast, Synergy record. And I said to myself, I'm going to figure out how he did that. And that's what kind of started it. The day after I graduated, I completely forgot all about it. It wasn't until around 1996 or 97, I went back to graduate school. And I could only study at night because I had 2 small children and I had to wait till they went to bed. So I studied until 1 or 2 in the morning, and I kind of trained myself over a 3-year period to stay up till 1 or 2 in the morning. Well, after I graduated graduate school, I still was up till 1 or 2 in the morning. And I said, what am I going to, I can't go back to sleep. So I said to myself, I'm going to go back and read all my old lecture notes. So lecture notes is an old magazine that a lot of people looked at. Started looking at lecture notes and saying, I could do this. So my original foray to where I am now was to basically rewrite lecture notes in a more modern format. Update the circuits and that kind of thing, but have a hook. And my hook was I was going to offer blank PC boards. So people who would subscribe to my newsletter would then get a PC board in the mail. And so you would pay X amount of money a year, you would get so many issues, and you would get blank boards to build a synthesizer. That was my original intent. That stood for Module of the Month. Well, it was Module of the Month for exactly 1 month. And the reason it was Module of the Month for 1 month was I underestimated the interest. I figured maybe I could get 20 people to do it. My original goal to do it at all was to buy a new stereo. I never really had a good stereo. By I say good, I mean like a Krell Mark Levinson, something high-end, B&W Matrix speakers, a $30,000 stereo. So I said to myself, I'm tired of my Pioneer. I'm going to do this, and maybe in 3 years I'll get a good stereo. Well, I started talking about it on the Usenet. This is before we had user groups and we had Usenet. And it turned out that 200 or 300 people were interested. Well, I went, well, that's too much work. If there's that much interest, then I'll take a step back and I'll just sell it online. So I had already talked about MOTM, so we had a contest to rename MOTM from Module of the Month to something else, and a guy named Dave Bradley said, let's call it, Mother of All Modulars. So I said, fine. So we officially changed the name, even though some of my earlier distractors will, or detractors, I guess, will still say, well, it's supposed to be Module of the Month. So that's where the name came from. But it's really doesn't mean much of anything anymore. I don't think anybody even refers to it as the mother of all modulars. It's just MOTM. And then it turned out once Google came on, the first thing I Googled was MOTM to make sure I wasn't going to get sued by somebody. Sure enough, what's MOTM? There's a pretty big MOTM thing, which happens to be Jimmy Buffett's annual Parrot review or Parrot Head. So there's a Jimmy Buffett thing. So I had to get that straightened out. So yeah, this was around 96, 97. So there was no Google, there was no Wikipedia. There was bits and pieces on various, forums and stuff. And the only thing that you saw was that there was always Paya, and there was Blaceit and the frac area. Doepfer, I heard the name, but I had no idea what it was. I didn't even have a point of reference for that. And that was pretty much it. I mean, there was nothing else. So Valentine's Day of 1998, I turned on my website, and I had exactly 2 modules to sell, a power supply and a noise generator. And it kind of took off from there. It snowballed so quickly that pretty soon, synthesizers.com popped up, ModCan popped up, and then I kept seeing references to Doepfer, and I looked over and saw the small format, but I wasn't interested at all in doing, I came from the old Keith Emerson giant, Moog modular thing, so that's what I was attracted to. The look that I wanted to do was, first off, I wasn't going to, copy the Moog look. So I like the Moog look. I used to own a Moog 3C serial number 6. So I didn't want to have that look, but I did like the Aries look. And so Aries was a kit company based, I think, out of New England in the late 70s that still had the black panels and stuff. And I kind of like the Aries look. I like the jacks on the bottom. I like, the order of stuff. And one of my competitors, I won't say who, recently said, that's why my systems don't look like a heartless grid of knobs and jacks enforced by a soulless mathematical formula, end quote. Seriously, I wanted jacks on the bottom because a lot of my customers said, I don't want the patch cords in the way. I personally like the way that mixing boards looked. I always was the guy who got, DB Magazine recording and looked at the giant SSL consoles, and when you had to have roller skates to go up and down, and I like the fact that it's ordered. And that's part of my persona, is that's what attracts me to first chemistry and engineering in general, that it is ordered. Okay, that's very attractive. In fact, Carl Sagan was famous for saying the reason there is science at all is because if you drop a ball 10 times from the same height, it always drops the same time. That's how science was born, that there's a reason for these things. So I like the order stuff. And some people say, I just don't like it. And I say, well, I'm sorry. That's just me. That's a little bit of my personality, into the product. Part of it is because in the MOTM sense, it was a consistent way for people to build all my modules without having a surprise every time they bought something. So I spent a lot of time and effort being consistent from module to module whether it's a VCO or a VCF or something, that the construction techniques were similar throughout each kit to make it easy to build. So a lot of the looks of it has to do with the fact it was designed to be easy to build and not mass produced. If you mass produce something and the SMT robot's building it, the SMT robot doesn't care where it puts the parts. But if you have amateurs who are soldering for maybe the very first time ever, there's some degree of comfort knowing that if they buy the simple kits, when they go up to the more elaborate kits, it's still going to put together in the same way. And so part of the look is that as well. And it simplifies the wiring and it simplifies the instructions. I think it's like, why do people like to cook versus go out and eat at a restaurant? Some people like to cook just because it's tactful. They like to get in the kitchen and smell and cut and dice, and other people say, that's a huge mess and it's icky and it gets up your fingernails. So people say, yes, and that's what I love about it. I actually had customers complain my kits didn't have enough parts. They go, could you make it the next one with more parts? And then the next one. So it's kind of like, that was part of my problem was, I wanted to do simple stuff that a lot of people could do, but the experienced kit builders were pleading for me, well, could you make a 42-channel vocoder all out of diodes and I can solder 500 parts? That would be great. And I go, well, you know what? The problem is somebody, that would be me, has to take all those parts and count them out and put them in little plastic bags so you don't have to. And so what's ironic is that, I grew up on the tail end of Heathkit, which is where all this stuff started. And the whole point of Heathkit was not for cheaper, but for the same price, you could get the best thing out there, the best color TV, the best ham radio, and you could have the pride of ownership, okay? And in the synthesizer world, I think the reason my stuff took off is people were initially convinced there's no way they could ever build something like this themselves. I mean, it's like modular. It's like, there's fluby dust in there. It's, unicorn blood. It's all kinds of secret stuff. And I tried to show them, yes, you can. And people were like, who had never soldered in their life for building my VCO kits. And I have customers who have built over 100 modules themselves. And I think it's pride of ownership. Okay, I don't think they even view it as what I did for them. It's like, that's what I did. It's like I'm almost removed from the equation, which means I did my job, because that was the thing. When I was starting out, I thought to myself, I'm setting myself up for a lot of phone calls and returns and, burned up, modules and, liability issues and things like that. I haven't kept a really good record, but I would say that of the close to 9,000 kits I sold, less than 30 ever came back. And of those, most of it was just one bad connection or one thing. There was only one module that ever came back that was an MOTM 120 cross modulator that was so bad I took pictures of it. And I felt so sorry for the guy. I sent him a whole brand new assembled one that I built and said, do it this way. Of course, he got insulted and never ordered anything else. But I think he used a wood burning set to solder it. It was in coat hanger wire or something. It was a real sight. But I think it's pride of ownership kind of a thing. Plus, relative to the time, it was cheaper. I mean, there's always the thing that kits are cheaper than assembled. That was the other thing which caught me was it is for you, but not for me. And the turning point came in June of 2006 when one day when I was bored, I decided to get a spreadsheet out and calculate exactly how many parts I had put in little plastic bags. And it was 1.7 million. And I thought, that can't be right. And I did it 3 times. It was 1.7 million parts. And I said, I'm out of my mind. So I decided to announce I was getting out of the kit business in June of 2006. Plus, I was seeing a slow decline. By then, .com was there, MOTM was there, Cynthia was starting, Oakley was starting, Eurorack was starting to go up with Doepfer, and I was seeing my sales decline. So I decided to send out to all my customers an email saying, you have 1 month to order any kits, and then I'm shutting down the kit business. And I figured maybe I'll get orders for maybe 100 or so. 916. This is a hobby for me. This has always been a hobby. It's never been a full-time job. I mean, I'm a licensed professional engineer in Texas. You know, I work for a major semiconductor company as an applications engineer on handheld device processors. So this is just me having a hobby. Now, as hobbies go, it's pretty elaborate, and it's a paid-for hobby. So how many hobbies do people pay you to have a hobby? I mean, it's like being paid to bass fish or something. So, but it's still part-time at nights and on weekends. You know, it really didn't bother me because, again, my economic livelihood doesn't depend on it. If I was 35 and single and this is my sole source of income, I probably have a different perspective on it than, well, someone's poaching my hobby, you know, boo-hoo on me. Plus, I've always been my own worst enemy in terms of delivering because, you know, I get all these orders and then I do it, and my wife and children say, you know, we have to go, you know, to Christmas dinner. I'm like, no, please, I have to count parts, you know. So it became, as my children got older, it became more and more of a family burden. And so that's why in the 5U, I'm giving that business to another third party who's taken over that, and I'm going to concentrate on strictly surface mount technology going forward, so I don't have to sit there and hand solder and count parts anymore. It's easy to get caught up in the design and engineering phase because that's the fun part. So everybody likes to sit there and have a new idea, and you explore the parts, you lay your boards out, and you tinker on the thing, and you load the software, whatever. You know, it's alive. You know, you always say it's alive, just like in Frankenstein. You have to. And then the reality hits, oh my God, now I have to build 300 of them? Well, it took me 6 months to build that one. How am I going to build 300, you know? Oh, but if I build 300, I still have this other order I have to ship. And then if I work on that order, I can't ship the 300, but I have to ship the 300 to pay the parts, and then it becomes a cash flow problem. What's happened is a lot of people underestimate the amount of money it takes to actually run this as a business, even though it may be a hobby. It's not a cheap hobby. It seems cheap when you look at, well, this little module only cost me $35 to build, and I can sell it for $110, and I'm making a ton of money. Well, it looks great for one of them, but for example, in my case, when I got orders for those 916 kits, that was $280,000 in parts I didn't have. Where am I going to get $280,000? To buy the parts I don't have. See, that's the cash flow problem that you have. And most people struggle with that cash flow problem. I think that the main issue for me is, what's fascinating is the same thing. I'll go back to chemistry again. In chemistry, you have a set of elements, but you can take these elements in different combinations and get completely different reactions, okay? And in electronics, you have all these parts, and you can put them together in different ways, and out can come an oscillator or a Geiger counter or a make noise widget or whatever you want, and it's the same parts, but people can take the same parts and have completely different things, and then that becomes a module, and then you can take those same modules and give it to 5 different musicians and get 5 different kinds of sounds out of them. So there's actually 2 different levels built in. There's the engineering excitement for what you can do, and then there's the musical side that says, once I have it, what can I do with it? And I think part of the resurgence is, I blame the Korg Triton. The Korg Triton was the best thing that ever happened to the modular synthesizer industry. Whereas the Yamaha DX7 was the worst thing that ever happened to the analog synthesizer industry because it single-handedly killed it. The Triton is why we're all around today. And the reason is is that Korg said, here is everything you need in this one unit. It's got the sounds, the sequencer, the storage, the memory. This is all you need. Musician says, you're right, and they sold thousands of them. But what happened? Every musician whose livelihood depends on making music sounded like they had a Korg Triton. Oh, here's a tape. Oh, it's a Korg Triton. Oh, here's a tape. Here's a Korg Triton. Here's Hans Zimmer. Thank God, Hans Zimmer. Korg Triton. Jesus. Okay? So everybody started to sound the same. And the musicians were like, well, what do we do? And they started to go and look at the analog stuff going, here's how I can be different. I can put my secret sauce in there. And I can make sounds, even though the same modules are owned by this guy over here, I can patch them different, I can tune them different, I can process different. I can now sound like me again. And remember, there's guys in the business of selling me. And I think that's a big part of the resurgence. I think Ableton Live, what happens is and I happen to use Ableton Live in my demo, it's so powerful and does so much that people learn one little bit of it and stick with it, and everybody learns that one little bit, and they all have the same bit. Even though the program is way deep, it's too deep. It does too much. That's why still people like guitars. It's got 6 strings. That's it. Okay. That's, Pat Metheny's got 1,200 on his, but it's a thing where it's simple, so you can understand it, and you can sound. It sounds weird. You think that if you give somebody many options in a piece of software, they can take all these paths, and that's how they can sound different. But people are intimidated. They go, I don't want to do all that stuff. It's too many layers deep. That's why people like the modulars, even though it kind of looks complicated. They know that they can just move one patch cord or turn one knob and get a completely different sound. It's still tactile. They feel like, I don't think anybody feels like when they click on a mouse, they don't feel like they did it, the computer did it. But when they're on a modular and they move the patch cord and they turn the knob, they did it. So again, it's that ownership. They start to own the music. I think if people use too much production software, they feel like it's in there and they're just like trying to get it out. They're not putting music into it, they're trying to get music out of it. And that's, again, it's not very tactile. That's why people like to touch the modulars. I never bought into the whole idea of vintage electronics. The idea that vintage analog sounds better than the current stuff. And usually at that time period, we're talking about a Mini Moog will sound better than a Roland SH-101. That kind of argument. And they say, well, it's because it has Curtis chips and blah, 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 blah. And so that is what I call a musical argument, right? And I came in and said, well, that's like arguing over which is the best beer in the world. I mean, does it matter? Or does it matter what beer you like? I mean, how can you say this is better than that when it's a personal preference? But I never bought into the old vintage thing because I would tell people, this thing that you think is old and great sound, this Neve preamp. Well, guess what? You have it now and it's vintage. 25 years ago, it was brand new. And something else was vintage. And 25 years before that. So why do you think that electronics ages like cheese or wine? It actually gets worse with age. And I think part of that is a musician's somewhat, I hate to say the word fear, but a lot of musicians are convinced that they, and I'll pick on guitar players because they're an easy target, that if they want to sound a certain way, they have to do A, B, C, and D. Because if they do A, B, C, and D, this particular tone comes out, and they probably stumbled on it by accident, and now they're terrified that A, someone's going to steal their tone, or B, they're going to lose the recipe. There's somehow magic in there, and it'll be lost forever. But I never bought into that, okay? Again, I come from the engineering side. I looked at the old Moog modular schematics and stuff and went, he did the best he could with what he had because it was 1968. But we're, 2001. why would you think that something done in 68 was inherently better than something you could do in 2001 just because it was done in 1968? I said, there's nothing else in the world that's like that. No one says, I'm not going to buy that new plasma TV. I like my old black and white one. It's vintage. So why would you say that certain musical electronics are somehow better than your TV or your washer or your dryer? To me, it's just electronics. Okay? And so I got a lot of flack for that, saying, well, you just don't get it. The old thing, you're not one of us sort of a deal. You're not a musician. How can you design musical products without being a musician? And I said to myself, I think I can, because I'm going to find musicians to tell me if they like it or not. So that's what I started to do. So I started to talk to Robert Rich, and I talked to Joe Walsh, the Eagles, and Roger Powell, and had people like that be my beta testers. So I got people who I depended on to tell me this is good, this is bad. Because I tell people I don't buy any. It doesn't matter what I think. I don't buy any. And if I do a bad job, no one else will buy it either. So I handled the engineering side, and they told me if they liked it or not. Because to me, it doesn't sound like anything because I hear the flaws. I'm like, well, what's that doing in there? What's that doing there? And they're like, that's cool. I go, really? You sure? Yeah, keep it in there. I'm going, okay. So that's what I do, is I depend on people who do this for a living to tell me if I did a good job. I have ideas of what I think would be a good module to do. But I think in terms of more implementation, like what processor would I pick? What software do I need? What's the cost going to be? What kind of thing? And then my main source I go to is Robert Rich. And I go to him and I say, okay, here's a prototype. What do you think? And he'll say, okay, this is bad. Don't do this, do this. And I always follow his recommendation. Then I'll take it and I'll give it to somebody else. And I'll give it to somebody else. And I'll have 3 or 4 people listen to it. Okay? Now sometimes, a lot of stuff what we do is not listenable. If I do a new module I have is a USB interface for expert super silent way. Well, that's control voltages. Who can listen to control voltages? Okay? So that is more of, is this useful? Try it under Apple and Android and don't let me know if it crashes or not. But if it's something like a filter, okay, I will make measurements, and I have lots of equipment to make measurements, but I will always let people listen to it first to be sure. The ideas I have for stuff tends to be a little bit more in the digital side than the analog side right now. And that's mainly because as time has gone on, the analog pool of parts that are available to buy shrinks every year. And it's just getting harder and harder to physically buy the parts anymore. Plus, there's only so much you can do analog. I mean, I don't think anyone's going to come up with a brand new filter anytime soon. Okay, I mean, there's only so many mathematical transfer functions that define filters, and once you build circuits to do those transfer functions, you're done. Now you can get lucky like Bob Moog did and do something that's really unique, but you don't want to bank on luck. Okay, so you're better off, and at least in my case, I look at stuff what's not out there. I try to do something that's unique. It's not uncommon for people to have design partners for things. Like I have a design partner who does mostly my software for me. And in the past I had Jürgen Haubel, who recently passed away, and some other people that helped me in the design side of things. But they were kind of in the background, and a lot of them are very shy. They don't want to be in the forefront, let's say. And the people in the front are the ones who are passionate, and there's always some people in the background who are little worker bees, let's say, sort of a thing. So I think you'll find out that some of the people you talk to are the passionate ones, but they have someone quietly in the corner doing the it's not even Saturday yet, and they're stabbing people apparently. Yeah. I think it's safe to say that I have a different outlook than most of my competitors, okay, good or bad, and it's just because I got into it so I could do my senior projects to graduate my undergraduate WE program. I didn't do it because I wanted to be on stage playing synthesizers. I did it because I had to have a senior project. I thought this would be a good senior project to do, okay? And part of it was, when I started MOTM, what kind of got me thinking about how to do things was a friend brought over a CS60 for repair, Yamaha CS60. Mm-hmm. And I opened it up and I looked at it, and I was like, you're kidding me. It's like all these little boards and this little wiring harness. It looks like a Japanese radio from the 40s. Little, nightly laced, nylon laced wiring harnesses. It wasn't designed the way I thought at all. I'm like, why would you build something like this? It's not thought out, it's not engineered, it's just like thrown together. So I got a big sheet of drafting paper, when we used to have drafting tables. On the top I wrote what Bob Moog did not have. And I just started listing everything I could think of that back in the late 60s, early 70s, he didn't have that we had access to. The first thing I wrote on there was LEDs, which is funny because I don't like LEDs, but I wrote LEDs. Then I wrote heat shrink tubing. Then I wrote CAD software. Then I wrote FPGAs and DSPs. So I said to myself, we have all this stuff, no one's using it. They're still building this stuff like it's transistor radios. So that was my approach, was to say, I want to show people how to build stuff a different way. So I kind of went for the high-end quality angle as opposed to the low-cost side. I didn't want to sell hundreds of thousands. I just wanted to do a good job in engineering. Because Eurorack is, because it's small, it forces the majority of people, I think they're finally coming around, the ones who aren't, to go to surface mount technology. When you go to surface mount technology, it's a good thing and a bad thing. The bad thing is you have to buy thousands of parts at a time on reels because that's what the machine wants to have loaded into it. So you just can't buy 100 resistors, you buy 3,000. And you're going, geez, 3,000 resistors. Well, the good news is they're 10 for a penny. Okay, so you wind up with hundreds of thousands of parts that you have to buy. Then when you do the first one of boards, it costs you $800 or $900 to program the machine, run the stencils. It's expensive, but in 2 or 3 days, you have hundreds of perfectly stuffed working boards. Hundreds of them, because it's like a Xerox machine. The modern pick-and-place equipment that's not cell phone or iPad stuff, but just run-of-the-mill stuff, can place 12 parts a second. That's slow, 12 a second. The fast ones do about 28 a second. That's so you can sit there and load that machine up, and once you load the machine up, let's just make a couple of hundred. And you can't do that with the larger through-hole hand-soldered stuff. You have to have a staff of people and wave solder and equipment. It's just not good economies of scale. And so Eurorack, because it's small, does that. You wind up with lots of stuff, and then it turns out that you have a different model. You have a distribution model in Eurorack. Like in the US, you have Big City Music, Analog Haven. Europe, you have Schneider's Bureau and Post Modular and things like that. So instead of me having to sell 1 or 2 modules to 1,000 people, I can sell 200 modules in 1 day to 1 person. That's very attractive. Okay, so it was a combination of being able to do surface mount and getting away from the tedious business of me having to solder all these little parts, and it's a quick way to generate revenue because it is the pervasive module format right now. If you look at my Eurorack modules, they're still definitely me. I mean, it's still kind of block lettering, simple. It doesn't look like a treasure map. It doesn't have colors, and every module has different knobs and jacks in different places. And believe it or not, a lot of people like that. In fact, some people say, I can always spot your modules in the rack because it's the plain ones. Well, let's talk about the market, at least what I think the market is. So I divide the market into what I call professional musicians. These are people whose only source of income is them selling their music. That's it. They don't have a day job. They don't have, maybe they have a girlfriend that has a real job, but they themselves, their livelihood depends on them selling music. I would say that percentage of those people who use modulars, not laptop stuff, I'm talking about, rack mount modulars, consistently in their business is probably, the people who actually buy the stuff as a percent of customers, probably 1 out of every 200 or 300 is the ratio. The vast majority of people buy these systems have no intention of doing it for their livelihood. They do it because it's fun, okay? Because you can sit there, and even if you know what you're doing, you can still get something out, okay? It's like Wernher von Braun, the rocket scientist. He said he was engaged in basic research, which was, that's what he was doing when he didn't know what he was doing, in basic research. So you're right. So people, it's funny to go to the booths and watch people, or even go to YouTube and watch people do demos. It's very obvious to me that these people are just randomly turning knobs. I call it TTH, turn till happy, okay? So part of the stuff that I do for Eurorack, because I consider the MOTM 5U stuff, that's my professional line, okay? That is probably the people who buy assembled modules or assembled systems from me, it's 95% professional musicians. The people who buy Eurorack, it's 0.2% professional musicians. And so they want immediate gratification. So in my Eurorack modules, I make sure that every knob has an extremely wide range of scale, I call it, so that they can turn that one knob and get 30 different sounds from one knob turn. Because that's what they want when they're not going to sit there with a book in their lap and spend hours and hours trying to make the perfect cello. That's not the market. That's the 5U market, okay? The Eurorack market is like, I got $200 in my tax return, let's go buy a module. Oh look, shiny purple, get that one. A lot of it is marketing, in a way. I mean, we went through a little deal last year about who can pick the craziest name. Now, I think thankfully that's kind of died out a little bit, but that's kind of where it started going a little bit. And that's why I think the guitar is the most widely bought and unused instrument ever invented by man. I'd be willing to bet that less than 1 out of every 500 guitars ever sold is played more than an hour a day. It just winds up in the bed, in the closet or something, because it takes a lot of practice and effort to get even basically good on a guitar. Whereas on a modular synth, if your goal is not trying to play Smoke on the Water to start with, but you just want to make something that's kind of cool, it's fairly easy to get something kind of cool out of 2 or 3 modules. I mean, you can say, oh, Tangerine Dream. Hey, look what I did. And I call those people beepers and boopers. And that's the vast majority of the people who buy the lower priced kind of stuff. And that's fine, because that's why we're all in business. The marketing aspects of modulars is completely counterintuitive to the past marketing, the way that the music industry has marketed stuff. The music industry shares something in common with another industry, which is the sports industry. So what is the common tie between the marketing between music and sports? if you want to be like famous person, then you have to have famous person's stuff. Because since famous person uses the stuff, how could you possibly be like famous person without the same stuff? That makes no sense, does it? Well, the answer is famous person could be famous person no matter what stuff he had. He just happens to have that stuff because it was either given to him or it's something that like Eddie Van Halen's guitar that he just threw together with 3 different guitars and some duct tape. Okay, Eddie Van Halen did not calculate the resonance properties of the wood and the duct tape. He says, look, I got this neck and this bridge and some duct tape. I got a guitar. But it's Eddie Van Halen. If you get Eddie Van Halen and Les Paul, it's still Eddie Van Halen, but it still come out. But there's this underpinning, I won't say it's an underpinning lie, but it's an underpinning fear that's been put in that you have to have that stuff. If you want to be like the Edge, you have to have this pedal, and that's got to hit that chorus, and that delays 4 milliseconds, and that goes in that feedback. It has to go through this cable, or else you can't sound like the Edge. Whereas the Edge, you could probably pick up any guitar and any pedal, and it's still the Edge because he's the one playing it. And it's true in sports, right? You want to be like Jimmy Connors, you have to have a Wilson T1000, blah, 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 blah. Modulars are kind of the opposite of that. It's like, you know what? You get to pick. We're not going to tell you what to pick. You have so many things to choose from that it's your system. You're not forced into a corner. You don't feel like, well, I have to have this and I have to have that, and if I don't have this, I can't sound like that. If everyone's got Ableton Live and the same plugins and the same sound libraries and the same sample tank, the same stuff is going to come out. No matter how hard you try, people are going to be attracted to a certain kind of sounds and a certain, you could have 55 drum sets and everyone's going to use conga number 3. Because you know what? Conga number 3 sounds good to most people. So that's what we like that one. Well, yeah, everyone likes that one, so everyone uses that one. But if you have to sit there and make your own conga, it's a different story. So it's kind of like painting. I mean, you can have all the paint brushes, because I came from an art background, so you have all the paint brushes and all the paint and all the canvases, but even though you've spent all this money buying the best paint and canvases, you still have to pick up the brush and paint. And what's funny, because no one talks about a famous painting, about what paint he used. Well, the reason this Renoir looks so good, that's, burnt umber number 12. Okay, people go, it's Renoir. They go, what about the brush you used? Who's the brush guy? Forget the brush guy. He just dunked a rabbit in the paint and used his butt, So it takes away what you've heard all these years in the music industry and kind of detaches it and says, don't believe the hype. You go decide what you want. We'll help you out. But it's still your system. It's not a canned, go to Guitar Center, get a little starter kit. Okay, I want a Telecaster. I want a Super Twin Reverb, pre-CBS, 1961 blackface. Blah, blah, blah. And now I've got exactly what I need. Oh, I still can't play it. In traditional, what's the term, musical pedagogy, right? Teaching the music. When you have a piano, so your mom buys you this piano, and it's this crappy spin-it piano that Aunt Ethel had in the basement, or it's out of tune and it sounds like crap and the soundboards work. But that's ching, 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 that's all you got. All right? You can't change the sound of that piano. You have this guitar that your parents gave you because you begged them to get a guitar. Okay, so here's a guitar, ding, 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 okay. But if you have that same stuff in a modular, all of a sudden, this is a different sound. This is a different sound. This is different. This is different. So there's a quicker way to make different kind of sounds. Now, are you going to actually be the next, Klaus Schulte? No. But what turns out is that people who buy traditional instruments, they always think to themselves, I'm going to be the next Al Di Meola. So I'm going to buy this, nice, Martin guitar and take lessons. And you find out, I'm not going to be Al Di Meola. Okay? The people who buy the modular stuff, I don't think have that expectation. I think they're like, this is visually attractive. It looks cool. Okay? it seems complicated, but it's broken down to individual little pieces. And so if I can just kind of start, so even if, here's the beauty of it, even if you have a giant modular, you can still only learn 3 modules at a time. Just don't look over there. Just start over here and then slowly work your way around it, kind of a thing. Yeah. And plus, the beauty of it is, unlike Ethel's piano, you can't say, well, I don't like the low octave, I just won't play down there. On a modular, you don't like a module, you sell it on eBay and buy another module. So you can change your mind. And I've had people who have a rack and they'll churn their modules out every 2 years. It's a different system. It's constantly evolving. What other musical instrument can you do that? Well, I changed my E string. Well, okay, but it's still, you can't take your guitar apart and screw with it unless you really, really want to, but most people won't do that. But a modular, you can. So you tend to mold it yourself to the way that you want it. And probably half of the people who buy systems don't use them for sound generation, they use them for sound processing. So they run other audio through the modular. So what other instrument can do both? Most instruments, by their very nature, are sound generation only. A modular is both. So it's like you got an extra function you didn't even have to pay for.